Hi guys, this is a video on how to set up and run a air sensitive reflux on the Schlenk line. Before introducing the condenser, you need to flush it and purge with nitrogen gas. So instead of going through the usual process of evacuating and backfilling, we're actually just going to connect it up to a swan neck adapter with 2 lines of grease, as you would do normally with any part of glassware on the line. We're then going to connect it up to a tap and just blow nitrogen through the open system for about 10 minutes. And that should sufficiently remove enough air for it to be still considered air sensitive. So rotating our swan neck adapter around to spread the grease evenly, making sure we've got a nice sealed connection between the quick fit glass joint there. Wiping off some of the excess and then connecting it up to our line. We don't have to clamp it at this stage, we can just leave it lying flat in our fume hood and turning our tap open to the nitrogen manifold. So flushing nitrogen through for around 10 minutes. You also notice as well that at this point our silicone oil bubbler has ceased bubbling, and that's because the main outlet, or the path of least resistance for nitrogen to exit our system, is now out through the big hole at the bottom of the condenser rather than out the outlet on the silicone oil bubbler. So we do turn up the nitrogen slightly just to recommence bubbling here. It's more of a precaution than anything, as enough nitrogen is flowing through our system now to make sure that the other things that we have on the line, the other flasks, are also under an inert atmosphere and a positive pressure. So after this time, we can then keck clip our swan neck in place securely and then grease our condenser on the other end. This time we're applying a ring of grease. And that's just because when we connect up our system, we won't be able to rotate the condenser around fully. And so to make sure that there's enough grease on each side of our condenser outlet and our quick fit glass joint, we apply the ring so that it can be spread easily and evenly. So removing the stopper and then quickly connecting up the 2 bits of glassware. Of course, our flask is under a positive pressure of nitrogen as well, so it's okay to remove the stopper very briefly, as any nitrogen will blow out any air that attempts to get in then. We're going to add another keck clip to this connection here as well. And we can see now that we have both parts under nitrogen, so it's flowing in through the top and also into the side of our Schlenk arm. And then we're going to add a support clamp for our condenser. It's easier to put this on the clamp stand which the thermocoupler hot plate comes with, as attaching it to the framing behind the Schlenk line is sometimes a bit tricky. Some of the taps and the hoses can get in the way, so you'll find it much easier connecting it up there. And then just remember as well, we're going to have this nice and loose. We don't want it tight against the glassware, as any pressure can damage the fragile bit of glass there. And then lastly, before we can start heating, we need to close the tap on the Schlenk arm. We start evaporating our solvent. If the side arm was open, then it would be allowed to escape into the tube in there and condense out, possibly bringing back impurity, but also just losing our solvent from our system. The tap on the top is okay to be open and have nitrogen flowing through it. As the solvent won't reach that high, it will already condense out somewhere up the condenser. We tend to make sure it doesn't pass halfway, but either way, it'll drop back down as a liquid rather than escaping as a gas out the top. So now we've connected our glassware up, we can turn our nitrogen flow down a little bit, as we previously increased it for the purpose of purging our condenser. But in a closed system now, ready for heating, we can turn that down. And then let's say we've got a solvent in there that boils at around 40. We're going to set our temperature on our thermocoupler temperature gauge up here to around 45, just above our boiling point, but not by too much. And then on the base, we can set this slightly above this point as well at around 75 or 80 degrees. Again, this isn't too high, so we don't overshoot the plateau that we want to achieve at 45 degrees. With good stirring then, we're going to heat fairly moderately, and we do that because we're not attaching our water jacket on our condenser. We don't have this connected up to the water tap. Instead, it's just an air condenser. The length of the condenser and also the length and shape of the Schlenk flask ensures that most, or if not all, of our solvent is going to condense on the sides of the Schlenk flask first, and then maybe at the beginning of the condenser, but it shouldn't really be rising any higher than halfway, as I said. If it does, we can connect up the water inlets and cool it down a little bit. But with moderate heating, we shouldn't really reach that stage. And then once it's done, we can turn off our heating, and then we need to raise our entire system out of the oil to allow it to cool down, but also so that it remains stirring. We also keep our condenser in place as well, ensuring that any solvent that is clinging to the sides of that is going to drop down back into our system. So you can see here that we just wipe our temperature probe with a tissue as it's been in the oil, rotating it away so it can't get in the way of our maneuvering, and then very carefully we're going to loosen this clamp and raise our system up out of the oil. At this point we can open up our Schlenk flask arm again so that it's exposed to the nitrogen manifold as well, although it's not terribly important as we do have nitrogen flowing in through the top of our condenser still.